Jennifer McCormick's education plan, a sobering local road funding estimate, plus Jamey Noel pleads guilty, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending August 30th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Jennifer McCormick, the former state superintendent of public instruction, shared her education plan for the state. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Kirsten Adair reports the plan emphasizes early child care and universal pre-K, school accountability, and teacher pay.
The plan says teacher salaries should start at $60,000. McCormick says the state could reprioritize funding to cover some of the cost.
Too often in Indiana, we talk about the expense because we are incredibly expensive, but we don't talk about it as an investment.
McCormick also says public dollars should be invested in public schools. The plan calls for any schools that accept public money, including private schools that receive vouchers, to be held to the same fiscal and academic accountability standards. The plan also calls for increased autonomy for schools across the state to utilize their resources. McCormick says schools should be encouraged to innovate while still being held to rigorous standards.
Could McCormick get any of her education plan through the Republican-controlled legislature? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Chris Elliman, are there elements of this plan that a Republican legislature would support?
Sure. I mean, first, I think it's a good idea that they came out in front of this, just because if for whatever reason the conversation does pivot to education, you know, I'm the first to admit that a Jennifer McCormick, Terry Gooden ticket has a lot more background and a lot more specifics to answer those questions than the opposing campaign. However, when you look at this plan, you know, I feel like it lacks a lot of the specifics that people with their background could have implemented into it if they spent a little more time on it. I mean, to me, you kind of grab 3 or 4 high-end things that everybody would agree on, right? Universal pre-K, increased school accountability, teacher pay, and you kind of just throw them out there as that's what we want to address. And then when asked how you're going to, the answer was just state funding. And I think you're starting to kind of see a pattern with a lot of these plans that are coming out, even going back to the property tax, when how do you hold local governments harmless? Well, we'll just get more money from the state government. So I think, you know, with that pattern, unfortunately, while there's good ideas in it, I don't think there will be an appetite for the legislature if your solution doesn't get more creative.
Would you expect a little more detail from people with the kind of credentials of McCormick and Gooden?
She'll give more detail as she goes along. I mean, that's what you do. But I think there are parts of this that if the Republicans stop with the ideology and focus on children instead, they ought to adopt. You know, when they took control, absolutely, in 2012, after the 2010 election and redistricting, they put in all these education reforms. And remember, shortly before that, we had 65% of the high school graduates going to college. We're down to 53% that are going to college. We had 92% of the third graders with reading proficiency. Now we're down to 82%. If we make the same incremental progress that we made this past year in those reading scores, it will take a full generation to undo the harm that's come from their, quote, reforms. She is absolutely right. We need to get back to traditional public education and invest the money in teachers to recruit the best possible teachers, not fill in the blanks with somebody who doesn't qualify to teach. All of those things she's putting emphasis on, particularly on early childhood education. Those are important components. If we want to grow this state, and if we want to have the kinds of jobs that we supposedly want to have for the future, we have to have an educated population. We are sinking beneath the waves. We're at the bottom of states in terms of funding of a percentage for education, and we're not getting any better. And we're diverting it to vouchers and to the flavor of the day charter school and all of these, and virtual education, all of these other half-assed ideas that have resulted in that decrease in college education and decrease in reading scores.
I want to ask about vouchers specifically, because it wouldn't be surprising for a Democratic candidate for governor to come out and say, we need to roll back the voucher expansion. That's not going to happen. Realistically, it's just not going to happen, at least not for a very long time, unless Democrats retake the legislature. So her proposals on private school vouchers is let's at least hold them to some of the same kind of academic and financial responsibility or accountability measures that we hold public schools to. Is that the kind of idea that might at some point get momentum in a Republican-controlled legislature?
I mean, it's at least a pragmatic approach, right? You know, you're not going to push for eliminating all vouchers. It's just not going to happen. So she wants them to have to accept all the same students that the public schools have to accept, you know. She wants them to have to show where their money is going, just like the public schools, so we can see how they're spending those state dollars. So that's at least a discussion that can at least happen, whereas there would be no discussion, dead on arrival, of anything to get rid of vouchers at this point.
Well, she's not proposing to get rid of vouchers.
No, she's not. That's what I know. There's been increased attention paid in the legislature recently to child care access, certainly. And last year, this past session, they acknowledged that what they were doing was not going to include funding because it was a non-budget session. Coming into a budget session, whether it's more access to pre-K, I don't think we're doing universal, but whether it's more access to pre-K, more access to child care, is that something that's going to be a high priority for the upcoming legislature?
They're certainly on people's wish lists, as was noted, I think. You know, everybody, in theory, well, I won't say everybody, most people would say these are fundamentally good ideas, even in the Republican-controlled legislature. The problem, though, is, again, funding. And the funding scenario is getting bleaker, not getting rosier. So if we didn't have universal pre-K and those types of things, when the money was flowing at an unprecedented degree, we're not going to have it now. Now, vouchers, you're right. People don't like it when government takes away benefits. The only tweak, though, that we might see is we saw some noise made about this last session where maybe rather than the vouchers as they are constructed now, you might have some mechanism by which dollars, a certain amount of money follows every student to any school, you know, whether it's a public school, a private school, that sort of every kid, essentially, figuratively speaking, shows up with a backpack full of cash, figuratively, in most schools anyway. And then that goes to the schools they choose. But in the short term, that's not something that the General Assembly wants to tackle this session.
I would say you saw some momentum for accountability from one of the most prominent budget writers in the State House last year, I think it was. So I think on that line in particular, if you want to say that it kind of is a top-down approach, you know, it starts with the leadership.
It didn't get a lot of enthusiastic endorsements, though, from
but it does when it starts with somebody
like somebody in that position of power.
As long as you've got tax dollars in it, we have a right to know how they're being spent. The problem is you come up against the First Amendment. You've got religious schools involved here, and you're going to get in there and you're going to talk, and you need to talk about what that curriculum is, so that student is all those students are prepared.
And if I can predict that's not going to happen.
And if all of this is
we need to be out of the curriculum
determined by market forces, as advocates say, where things are comparative, you can, regardless of zip code, you can choose your school. Well, you can't do an accurate comparison as things stand now, because some schools have to take all students, all comers, some don't. So until you get that kind of even playing field, there is no chart that shows you school performance in any accurate way.
Time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question is, should private schools that receive voucher dollars be held to the same academic accountability standards as public schools? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether a 0.6 percentage point increase in third grade reading test scores was something worth getting excited about. Just 32% of you say yes, 68% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, speaking of funding issues, it will likely cost Indiana's local governments nearly $2 billion a year over the next decade just to maintain roads and bridges roughly in the condition they're in now. And there's a nearly $1 billion gap between that need and current funding levels.
Roads and bridges maintained by local governments account for 85% of the total lane miles in the state. Currently, 31% of city and town roads are in poor condition, while 27% of county roads are poor. Those numbers come from the Local Technical Assistance Program at Purdue University, which works with almost every local government in the state to study its roads. LTAP also prepared the funding estimates for maintaining and improving local road conditions, as lead research engineer Jennifer Sharkey told lawmakers.
and identified a funding gap of $987 million to upwards of $2.41 billion annually for the next 10 years.
That's as the Indiana Department of Transportation expects the purchasing power of transportation revenue to steadily decrease over the next 2 decades.
Ann DeLaney, with all the other funding needs, some of which we just talked about, can Indiana realistically adequately fund local roads?
It has to. I mean, it absolutely has to. There are a lot of different reasons for this problem, okay? One of which is the state is so adverse to bonding. So, you know, we build a bridge and we want to pay it out of current cash. It's like building a home out of whatever your income is that year. And if you don't have enough income, you can't buy it. They've got to go back to bonding on these bigger projects, number one. Number two, they have to fix the way road funds are allocated, okay? Rural roads are in better shape because according to the formula, a 2-lane road for a mile gets the same allocation as a 6-lane road for a mile. I mean, those kinds of things need to be adjusted because they work against metropolitan areas. You get the legislature that comes down here and complains about Marion County's roads at the same time they're screwing them over with the formula. They also have to look at other means of raising those monies. As fuel economy improves and electric cars come on the market, we're going to need another funding source. But this isn't an option. We can't have bridges collapse. We can't be losing cars and potholes. It has to be done.
Yeah, is that, I mean, as we talk about all of the different funding needs, the wish list that John alluded to earlier, this one feels like it has to take a higher priority, but there are a list of like 2 or 3, like education has to be a top priority. Healthcare has to be a top priority.
They need to raise money.
So is this all of this coming to a head at once? Is this creating a real headache over at the State House?
Yeah, it's tough, especially when you talk about road funding. I mean, really the only solutions that were proposed, right, is will you give locals a gas option or a gas tax option? Do you, annually inspect odometers and charge people that way? Do you increase tolling? I mean, all of those are just quite frankly, anti-Republican, right? You're increasing taxes, but that's really, the only options that are potentially on the table right now. And, whenever you do consider that, a large portion of the funding already comes from the gas tax, and I think you have like some specialty fuel tax and things like that. I mean, it's really tough, and, I think part of the conversation is trying to capture revenue from people traveling through Indiana. That's one con about being the crossroads of America is your roads are going to get used a lot more than, other states on the coast than trucks. So
and if they don't stop, we're not capturing.
Yeah. So is that tolling, which, a lot of folks don't like? It's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an Indiana-only problem. That was pointed out at this meeting. This is a problem that basically every state in the nation has, which is our roads are, they're not in terrible condition right now, but to keep them just at that level is going to cost a lot of money, and the things we've always relied on to fund them are going to diminish. Is Indiana just going to have, and when I say Indiana, I mean the people of Indiana, are we going to just have to get a lot more comfortable paying some things that we've never had to pay before, things like tolling on a lot more or some sort of VMT thing?
Something has to give. I mean, we're trying to create, as a state, an economic environment where businesses find it appealing and want to relocate here. And so we have now one of the lowest corporate income tax rates in the country. But that probably doesn't matter if your customers and employees, your workforce, can't actually get to the point.
Well, they don't want to live here.
So, I mean, there is some point of diminishing returns there. We got the lowest taxes, but, I hope everybody works remote in your business, and all your customers do online order. So that's problematic, and something does have to give. Again, here and around the country, I just looked at the latest report from the American Society of Civil Engineers, who you would think they would monitor this closely and do. They put the national price tag, it's a couple billion here, or a billion gap here, 2.6 trillion nationally, and you have 1/3, according to that group, of the bridges in the United States are in serious.
Fortunately, our bridge conditions are considerably better.
So one of two things has to happen. Yeah. Either the federal government, we already just have seen the biggest infrastructure investment since the Eisenhower administration, under the Biden administration. Now, is that a taste of things to come? Probably not. I mean, that might have been.
And those dollars are largely not for maintenance.
No,
it's for new projects.
Those are new projects. But so one of two things will happen. The federal government will have to pour even more into this, which is also taxpayer dollars. I guess it's easy to say, hey, we're not paying for it, Hoosiers. We're getting the suckers, the federal government, to pay for it. Never mind that those are our dollars as well. But something does have to give is the answer to your question.
And to that point, Niki, this is a very long-term problem, but it's also a short-term, question in the next budget. Does it feel like, at least because of these other, not more pressing, but more immediate problems that they face funding-wise, this is one that's going to kind of take a back seat for maybe at least a budget cycle?
Maybe, but I mean, this is kind of the cycle we go through. I think the last time we did a large road finding project, it was maybe about a decade ago.
Yep, it was 2017,
and they're going to really have to think outside the box. Like, tolling isn't terribly popular, but we've progressed to a point where you don't need the booths or any of that. You need the technology. Yeah. And it isn't a tax. It's a legit user fee because you're on the roads. I know some other states are looking at things like, an additional tax on delivery drivers. I mean, heck, I have FedEx and UPS at my house 4 times a week, There's a lot of that. So we're just going to have to be a little more creative and open to new
Or to the
ideas.
point it was brought up,
raise revenue.
Or to the point it was brought up, weighing the trucks when they enter the state, weighing them when they leave the state, and then
But
basing
we've closed most
some
of our weigh
exactly.
stations.
So, but I mean, that's another way to, you're really worried about that truck traffic in the crossroads. If they don't stop here, well, that's a way to capture maybe something from them.
Isn't 70 the second busiest road in the country?
Something
to
like
95?
that, yeah. Or former Clark County Sheriff Jamey Noel has pleaded guilty to more than 24 felonies this week as part of a lengthy Indiana State Police investigation. Louisville Public Media's April Rickard reports.
Noel has changed his plea for 27 felonies related to his time as sheriff and in running an emergency services company. Under the agreement, 4 felony charges would be dropped. It calls for a sentence of 15 years with 3 to be on probation. Rick Hurdle is the special prosecutor in the case.
I think you do this long enough, it's hard to get surprised, but I think that an agreement to 15 years of a sentence, at least proposing it to the court and to the judge, we've come a long way since that initial hearing back in November.
In court, Noel admitted to accusations including theft, tax evasion, and money laundering. Special Judge Larry Medlock is taking the plea under advisement.
Niki Kelly, Noel was a major figure in the state GOP. I believe he was a member of the state Central Committee.
Yes.
Is there further fallout from this?
Gosh, I know a lot of Republicans are hoping not, and some people think that that's the reason behind a plea is to try to stop more stuff from coming out. Obviously, he has ties to Governor Holcomb as he, ran his campaign or chair of his campaign for one time. The governor has said repeatedly he had no idea. We actually talked to him this morning from Italy. Was he in Italy?
No, Slovakia.
Yep. And he said he is not interested in a pardon, that any discussion of a pardon for Jamey Noel would come from the next administration. So he's backing away from that. But I think a lot of Republicans are hoping that this ends it and more stuff doesn't keep coming out.
Yeah, so far we've seen his wife, his daughter also charged.
There's a couple
other like county or councilmen who are potentially involved. If that's as far as it goes, none of it's okay. But are we happy that that's as far as it goes?
Right, it's a bad thing. It's horrible. We can condemn it. But politically, on a statewide basis, I don't think the Hoosiers would hold that against the Republican Party as a whole. I think that both parties have bad eggs that do bad things. We could sit here and spend the rest of the show putting that list together, and we'd run out of time before we run out of names. But so the point being, people, I think, make allowances that this is not a party issue. This is a failed
person issue.
Person issue.
But you've got legislative races down there, and you have legislative candidates who may be associated with them in some way. And it's a culture of corruption, which is what happens when you have one-party control for that long a period of time. I mean, how this wasn't aware. I mean, he had some incredible number of high-priced cars. Nobody knew that on a sheriff's salary. I mean, there are things there that you raise all kinds of questions. I don't think this is over.
I mean, if one presidential candidate, for instance, were, say, a convicted felon, people would not condemn the entire Republican Party.
In the short term, politically speaking, just in that area, locally speaking, state house races, local races in the future, does this hurt Republicans, or is it he was a bad guy, these people involved with him were bad people, this is not all of us?
Yeah, I mean, locally, it depends how his ties are with the current people, I would say, in office. But I mean, I think this actually would impact the local community more than it would the state GOP as a whole, because I think he took over $2 million from different firefighting departments, police, things like that. So, I mean, I would be pretty heated if I was, an individual in Clark County.
And if there are candidates there who have taken money from him, for example, on other campaigns, that would
the
come
state
back
Republican Party got
money from
him that was used to credit cards that weren't his. So that happened.
I'm sure they're going to refund it, though, aren't they? Since it was taxpayer money used inappropriately?
Credit, I think, to the new sheriff who came in, saw some evidence of this and said, holy cow,
something's up here.
State police, you should probably take a look at this. Indiana Medicaid officials say they've been adjusting their processes for financial reporting and forecasting to avoid future budget problems after a $1 billion error last year. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports officials are starting their forecasting process earlier than normal and will continue to adjust the forecast as they collect more data.
The Indiana Family and Social Services Administration announced in January it would be improving its Medicaid forecasting and budget monitoring processes. It started publishing monthly financial reports in May. Paul Bowling is the chief financial officer for FSSA. He says the agency shares the reports with experts from other state agencies to get feedback and develop commentary to improve the accuracy of this year's forecast.
We're setting up a reporting structure and review process so that we can identify certain trends and risks that we may have not been able to catch in the past.
Bowling says there are 3 goals for the new process: reduce data lag, identify emerging risks, and produce a more detailed review of trends in the forecast. Medicaid officials will present the next forecast at the State Budget Committee meeting in December.
John Schwantes, why should lawmakers believe the numbers they're going to get in December and next April?
Well, I'm sure there are those who will say, we can't believe them now. I'm sure we'll hear that chorus. But, I mean, we have to trust agencies, I think, at some point, especially when they have doubled down and tried to renew their commitment to accuracy and transparency and timeliness so that there isn't another slip-up. I mean, we run a risk already of some members of the General Assembly saying every expert in every aspect of the executive branch of state government is foolish, doesn't know what he or she is talking about. I think that's dangerous. So I think let's take it on face value and say these are the most accurate numbers that are available and should be heeded accordingly.
I mean, is there a certain extent, one of the great things about Indiana's budget process is they've been able to trust the budget forecast, because it's incredibly accurate. It's done in a bipartisan and nonpartisan way.
Not always accurate. I mean, we could.
But pretty close.
It's always there a national trend.
But generally speaking, the number they get is the number they can rely on.
They're getting within a couple percent.
Yeah. Here, again, they weren't that off by the percentages, but the numbers are big when you're even off. Is this one where they're going to have to trust the numbers no matter what? Because what else are you going to do?
Well, yeah, they have to have a guide, and that's going to be their starting point. I do think having these monthly reports will make them a little more, accepting of it, because you'll be able to see what we're pacing at every month and not, at least have an idea where it's headed or where it's trending. So I think the monthly reports will help a lot. And I do think FSSA is really, really trying to fix what happened.
And that was the biggest question was, how did this happen? How do we make sure it never happens again? What you've seen so far of the changes to this process, is this the sort of work that needs to be done?
It's encouraging, and I think, the time will tell whether it bears the kind of fruit we want to see. I hope they put the same amount of energy into the Medicare waivers to catch those up before people die as a result of being on that list for too long.
Well, that goes back to the funding conversations we were just talking about, too.
And I would just add, I think the legislature set a precedent here of they're not, requiring every single agency to report monthly. It's like, hey, if you have $1 billion mess up, we might mandate you to start requiring more information on a monthly basis and kind of do a lot more things that might make your life pretty inconvenient. But that's what you get.
Finally, college football kicks off in earnest this week. The Big Ten has a new look with the additions of USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. And the college football playoff is expanded to 12 teams. Chris Mitchem, which Indiana school has the best chance of making the expanded playoff?
It's got to be the Fighting Irish. Yeah. And really, the 12-team playoff really helps them because 4 teams get in from the conference champions, and then it's just the next 8, which are who the committee thinks are good. So if Notre Dame doesn't lose more than 2 games, you have a pretty good option of getting in there.
How's Indiana's season going to be?
It may be better than Purdue's.
Maybe better than
We're
Purdue's.
ranked higher than Purdue.
Don't sell Kirk Cignetti short, the new coach at IU. I think it brought in 30-some new players, only a handful left over from last year's roster. Should be good.
Well,
so you're predicting they're going to make it?
Notre Dame. I do have to say, the idea that USC and UCLA are in the Big Ten is just ridiculous.
It's just ridiculous.
I'm so excited.
It's the Big 18 now.
Prediction, IU will beat UCLA in 3 weeks.
I'm so excited to see USC play in 25-degree weather in East Lansing and Michigan on a Tuesday night.
Or snow.
It's going to be awesome.
All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
Woo! Yeah.
There's an
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.